Hello and welcome. Social business. It means very, very different things to different people. I believe in many ways the exact definition of social business is still being ironed out by many companies. When Mike approached me earlier this year to actually put this report together, we hashed out a lot of the potential platforms, a lot of the potential ways in which we can approach the data and add value to it and add kind of insights to it that really make sense to African brands. We figured out that when it comes to social business, from my perspective especially, I believe social business is a set of new paradigms that are changing the way we communicate with our employees, with our staff, with our brand ambassadors externally, and of course with our customers and the way they communicate with us. Now, with this data that we put together in this report, it kind of shows exactly what correlations and what content and what types of social media engagements work most effectively. Now, before I kind of step into the top insights, I just want to step into the methodology a little bit more. So Mike's correct that we analyzed the top 200 companies by revenue in Africa. And what we did is we analyzed their Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter presences going back the whole year of 2013. And from all that data, we tried to figure out what content is performing the most. What content really works the best out of these African brands? What content gets the most traction? What is shared the most? What is liked? What is viewed the most? And we combined all those stats together into one index that we call the Social Engagement Index, which essentially ranks these companies in terms of their external social media usage. And we came up with the following top 10 brands, right? An interesting thing is that 4 of the 5 top brands in Africa in terms of social media are in the telecoms industry. And many of them are not even in this country. So this was absolutely fascinating for me because I think in many ways we as South Africans live in a bit of a bubble where we don't really know what's happening in the rest of Africa. And this data just shows just how burgeoning social media usage has become in the rest of the continent. There is a lot of representation from South Africa, but I mean Mobineal, Safaricom, MTN Nigeria, and Maroc Telecom, these companies aren't even in the continent, in the country, sorry. And it fascinated me to see just how quickly social media usage has spread throughout the continent when just 6 or 7 years ago it didn't even exist. We analyzed some of the top content, of course, within Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And an interesting correlation we found is that 100%, literally 100% of the top 25 Facebook posts across all of these companies' Facebook pages for this year were actually images, shared images with captions, with text, images conveying emotions, images conveying some kind of human element that wasn't actually directly related to the brand. I find that pretty fascinating. And it just goes to show that social media isn't really about selling. We all know this, but the data kind of backs it up that the most liked content quite literally is very interesting images and multimedia that connect with people's hearts and minds. As part of our internal survey, we surveyed some of the top African companies, and we found out that more than 2/3 of them already have an internal social media policy in place. Now, again, I found this an absolutely fascinating stat because in many ways, we see these big companies in Africa as almost like the lumberjacks of the 20th century, that aren't really quite with it. But more than 2/3, about 70%, actually have a proper policy in place internally, governing social media usage, governing the restrictions, and governing the platforms that are used internally. Regarding how much social media is blocked within the organization, 20% of companies block LinkedIn completely. And the remaining 50% of that have very limited access to the staff, typically the management and the executive teams. 26% of social media on Facebook and Twitter is blocked within these companies. And YouTube, an obvious 34%, which is the highest to date. Typically, the reason YouTube is blocked more than the others is obvious. It's not really known as a social engagement channel used by a lot of the bigger companies, which kind of makes sense. And when you look at the top performing consumer-generated content on YouTube, oftentimes it doesn't correlate with the kind of content the companies want to push out. We asked the companies, which of the following internal social collaborative software do they use? And we gave them a list of about 10 or 15 of the top social media suites internally around the world. And we found out that a company intranet is still pretty much the most used way of sharing documents within an organization. It's not exactly social business all the way, but I think it is the first step to becoming a full-on social business. Unfortunately, it doesn't show the other data points, but SharePoint is second in command there at about 25%, which I would say is the next step in terms of social business tools used internally, where all of a sudden you have document sharing combined with team workflow features, messaging, chat, profiles, that sort of thing. But really the next step is dedicated social media software from the ground up, such as WiseTalk, such as Microsoft Yammer. Microsoft Yammer, you don't see it here, but it's the third one there at about 9%. So companies in Africa are starting to realize the importance of this, but it's still very, very young in terms of overall adoption. One section of the report is actually dedicated to the top African social media influencers on Twitter, specifically the influencers that engage with the brands in our report. So we just wanted to figure out who's the creme de la creme that have the most reach and the most engagement in Africa on Twitter, but also the guys that approach and engage these companies the most number of times. So we combine these metrics from this data set to figure out, okay, who are the top people? And interestingly enough, there isn't any direct correlation between the people. They come from different countries, different industries. There are some interesting demographic quirks that I'll go into a little bit later. But by and large, across Africa, there's social media influencers that are engaging with these companies that already have traction. Kenya specifically is a very popular country where a lot of the consumer base is already on social media, and they've seen a lot of traction there. What we've done is we've obviously ranked the top companies by the number of Facebook fans. And again, telecoms completely leads the way in Africa. I find it fascinating because a lot of people see telecoms companies as dumb pipes, essentially connecting people together. But this Facebook fan usage and engagement just shows that the consumers behind these brands essentially are brand ambassadors. They talk about these companies, they share these companies' content, and they really care about their telecoms. For many Africans, a phone is oftentimes their only technological device. So it's very close to their hearts. And this kind of shows the correlation with that. The top countries by Facebook fans, where we pretty much added up the Facebook fans of all the pages by country. And we found that Egypt is really the #1 country when it comes to overall Facebook fan traction. I found this fascinating again because in many ways we don't think too much about Egypt, but obviously it came up a lot during the Arab Spring. And in many ways, people attributed, obviously, the extent of social media adoption in that country to the Arab Spring. And the data here just shows that the sheer volume of people engaging on social media is definitely present in those countries. South Africa is second and Nigeria close third. We did the same thing with Twitter. We find out the top companies by Twitter followers. And again, there's quite a large skew towards the telecoms industry. But here now we're coming closer to home, where a lot of the local countries or companies are on Twitter, and they're engaging very, very effectively. So when it comes to Twitter especially, I think South Africa is really leading the way in terms of overall continent adoption. So we tallied up the number of Twitter followers by country, and South Africa leads the way, followed by Kenya and Nigeria. So these are typically seen as quite innovative countries in Africa, and Twitter typically is the newer, more innovative platform. So that correlation is pretty interesting too. YouTube views. We did the same thing, and again, there's a bit of a skew to telecoms. Maroc Telecom is a very interesting outlier, where they're based in Morocco, and they have over 9 million views. I'm sure many of you may not even have heard of Maroc Telecom, since they're very niche in the market they operate. Yet their consumers actively view their videos. And I'll go into what makes these top companies' video content so successful at a later slide. The top countries, again, Egypt, Morocco, and South Africa. Morocco is there because of the outlier that is Maroc Telecom. Going into some of the key findings that I'd like to kind of unpack and describe today. Companies with at least one social profile correlate with 63% more revenue than those with none. Now, this sounds like quite a sweeping statement, and indeed it is just a correlation, but it's still very, very interesting to see. So essentially what this means is that we tallied up the revenue numbers, the public revenue numbers of all these companies in the top 200, and we figured out which of these companies have at least one social media profile on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And those with at least one profile correlate with that much more revenue. So just to kind of describe why I think this is the case, it's not necessarily that social media is causing these companies to actually generate revenue. I think in many ways, a lot of the top companies in Africa are B2C companies. They already have a lot of social traction. And at the same time, bigger companies essentially have access to larger budgets. So they would be more likely to effectively engage in social media. Of the top 50 companies by social engagement index, Egyptian brands show the highest number of Facebook fans and YouTube views. And I chose this picture specifically because many people have attributed the Arab Spring to social media. Over 80% of the top African social media influencers are male. And that was a very interesting finding that I found. It's rather unfortunate. I would love to see a bit more of a variety at the top there, but this is the stat that came out. And a lot of them are actually located in Kenya. So in many ways, Kenya is actually the hub of social media influence in Africa, where a lot of these people, celebrities, rappers, music stars, even movie stars, have incredible social media followings. And now the reason we analyzed African influencers is obviously brands are now starting to understand the importance of influencer engagement. And although we kind of took the data from the top down across all the companies, it's extremely important for each company individually to understand what are the influencers that are specific to their market, in their niche, in their location, and how they can effectively engage with them and make them brand ambassadors. This is fascinating to me. Most of the top performing Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube content across the platforms for the top 50 companies is not directly related to the core brand. So essentially, the content that gets the most retweets is not the salesy kind of content that brands often push out on social media. It's content that is not even directly related to the brand itself. So it may be, for example, a celebrity endorsement or an endorsement with a team. We know locally Vodacom has done very well with some sports sponsorships here, and that shows in the top content that we've seen for the Vodacom profile. And this kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of the other top performing social media content. Africans love their sport, so why not give them their sport, but make sure your brand is behind it. Content that is emotive, nostalgic, empathetic, or personal drives very high engagement. So we took a look at which content gets the most retweets, gets the most shares, gets the most number of comments across these branded social media profiles. And without a doubt, content that relates to consumers on a deeply human level really drives extremely high engagement. People want to talk about human elements. So ensure that your content is not boring. Ensure that it really relates on some deeper level. And this follows through to my next point, where the top branded YouTube videos connect with hearts and minds. A lot of companies connect their digital and traditional marketing models on YouTube by just uploading adverts, uploading their traditional videos, and seeing what happens. So there isn't a big strategy behind it. We found out that the top YouTube branded videos are all, number one, professionally edited and obviously designed for YouTube as short 5 to 10 minute clips. But at the same time, you can see the quality of the editing, the post-production, the script writing behind these kind of videos. It's not the kind of viral content that really works in the consumer space. In the branded space, if you want to work on YouTube, you need to connect with hearts and minds with an emotional, emotive story. But at the same time, there has to be some kind of investment in realizing that people kind of demand quality YouTube content. And I mean, ads, we hardly saw any ads in the top 50 videos. It just kind of goes to show that although ads do have their place in online, when it comes to YouTube, people prefer the stories, the human stories. The top performing content also almost always includes a call to action. And this data is also reflected internationally. There was a survey that came out that shows the most retweeted content in the world actually includes please retweet in the tweet itself. So in many ways, brands have kind of latched onto this. And this is, I think, what many marketers talk about as well, where you have to have that next step, that call to action. And the data really reflects that. So, it sounds a little bit gimmicky, but competitions still work. They always have. People are in it for themselves. They do want to win stuff. They want to be involved. But they also want to know what the next step is. So retweet and win, share and get. Those sort of simple calls to actions really work really, really well. I'd like to end my brief presentation off with one of my favorite insights. I mean, the top performing content really originates from Egypt, Nigeria, and Kenya. South Africa is a close fourth, but it's a fourth in the African map. So when it comes to social media, especially if your brand operates outside of just the South African space, or even if it doesn't, you have to be aware that Africa is absolutely burgeoning. And I mean, with the rise of smartphones and the decrease of data costs, this trend is just going to continue. With that said, it is constrained to those few countries, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, whereas almost the rest of the continent is a bit of a dark hole, a black hole, so to speak. But so to speak, you need to kind of understand where your content comes from, who are the influencers involved, and how to engage them. And a lot of the data in our report kind of goes deeper into these insights and kind of describes and unpacks how to go about doing this. I don't know if I should include the link, socialbusinessafrica.com. The report will be available from tomorrow, essentially, if you guys want to get access to it. And it'll go much deeper into the insights. Thank you. Thank you. Cool. Thanks, Mike. Cool. Thanks, Mike.
Mike, please don't be offended later when you check the Twitter stream and I didn't support your talk or I left my phone on the podium.
I'll forgive you.
So yeah, just to elaborate on what Mike has said, the report will be available. You each will receive by email an executive summary, so that will be part of the follow-up subsequent to the conference, and you'll be able to go into this insights in a little bit more data. If you do have questions about the report, where the data comes from, how it was garnered, please stop Mike. We're going to have tea now. There's going to be 15 minutes to ask from there, and I'm sure you'll be around for lunch afterwards. But I think the report that we were going through the final version yesterday, it's in excess of 100 pages of data. It's a really in-depth study. We go into a lot more detail around the influencers themselves, what content they're publishing, how they're publishing it. So I really do want to encourage you to ask questions. Have a look. It's available at socialbusinessafrica.com. It's also going to be available from the Cerebra.co.za website, and then of course fuseware.net will have information as well. So any of those three resources. Otherwise, you'll be able to email us and get more information accordingly. We are going to break for tea now, and we're going to come back at 10:45. So we'll shout outside as soon as we need you to come back and stay in. But thanks for your attention so far. Thank you very much.